Sonic Universe Issue 72 Reboot. The story starts out with Dr. E introducing Sally and Nicole to the Red Star Ring, his latest discovery. Nicole says she's got no records of such a ring. Even after thousands of years of civilization, you'd think someone of the billions of people who've existed would have seen one. I guess it only started being magically generated really recently. But you'd think if rings existed for all that time, not to mention Chaos Emeralds, red rings would. You'd think if people knew about emeralds and rings for all this time, they'd have known about red rings already. Also, how do you draw a red ring and not make it red? It's barely even orange. It's nearly just like a normal ring, but with much higher energy output. It would actually make more sense if he invented the Red Star Ring if it's so rare that Nicole's never heard of one. He could have made it by putting the power of multiple rings into one. Even then, 50 rings creates a warp ring, which is much larger than one of these things. I think red rings are worth 5 rings, so what's this much higher? Well, it's a different universe. The point is, why are these really rare and not outright warp rings? He hasn't even mentioned those. Instead, he says it came from the Lake of Rings on the island. The Lake of Rings isn't as special if there's more than one of them with no explanation. He says that the red ring was generated after a few days of no ring generation. What determines whether red ring will be produced or not? I don't know right away, so that just feels frustratingly arbitrary. There may be naturally occurring parts of the levels in the games, but this isn't the game's used universe. I want to ask this question if all the red rings were man-made. Nicole explains to Big that a server room is there to keep the computers cold. It's good to have this information for the people who don't know that. And Big says they didn't know computers could go bad. I mean, in a manner of speaking, metaphorically, they would go bad, like if they overheated. Just not in a way that attracted bacteria and flies, and you should know that. I have to wonder how there's no food in the fridge though. That's really unlikely. Fortunately, Dr. E says that the red ring might have formed because there's been dark eye energy recently. So then why are all the rings like these now? Also, this doesn't explain why there's red rings after Unleashed in the games. So it doesn't enhance the game's universe. Tails immediately gets the idea to make red rings himself synthetically. If that's possible, to the point where he thought so immediately, then why couldn't Dr. E have just been written to have made a red star ring at that point? We've already been told they're so rare that this is the first one Nicole's ever seen, so it's already been established as not trying to be like the games anyways. And while we've seen rings on their own, scattered all over the place, before we saw Nate's ring generator, and that's what made it silly that we were expected to believe he made every ring ever. We've never seen red star rings before, so it wouldn't have felt like it contradicted anything if he was the one who made them. Tails is actually confused when Sally says that the red ring could be great for Nicole, even though he's a genius. It's magical energy, of course it is. Sally likes the idea of using a red ring to have Nicole stay in her physical form for longer, getting a smart idea, as the energy gets used up fast most of the time, and she has her hand on her shoulder. It's a shame that this didn't happen until basically the end of the comic. If these red star rings come from the dark eye energy, and there's a lake of rings in Knothole's forest still, not to mention one from Meropist, Nicole could have easily gotten one of these a lot earlier. I like that a ring researcher is wearing ring-shaped things on his head. And it's nice of him to call the Nice Nicks his little robot buddies. But a ring researcher with ring-like things, like how Nate Morgan had a little ring thing on his eyeglasses. Wouldn't it have been great if he just brought back Nate Morgan instead? Of course, then he couldn't have had his whole unique subplot. But like, Nate could have been the ring researcher. You could have 2 characters. That would be some nice fan service. He says he's had them monitoring the Lake of Rings, I guess in case anyone would try to abuse the rings' powers. Nate didn't have the idea to do that. It turns out that might be making another ring, but yesterday he lost the video feed from the lake. What is that Paige doing? He says that the Nice Nick at the lake is still showing as active in his systems, and he had tried to take a closer look through the digitizer. That still doesn't make sense as an idea of his. And other feeds have gone offline too. Tails thinks it could be a hardware issue he could fix. There's so much talking. Nicole then says that this was what she wanted to talk about earlier, and she says that she thinks he was trapped in the digital world deliberately. Duh! There's a blockade! He was attacked! why does she think she's giving him a scoop? Why didn't he figure this out? She thinks that something's trying to take over her systems. He fortunately admits that she'd know better than anyone, despite wanting to believe that's impossible out of arrogance. And Nicole and Tails volunteer to handle it, while Sally and Big plan to go investigate the lake using a car. And Big needs to be told to keep his mouth closed after stuff keeps flying to his mouth, apparently. So just now he's written like Big. He was a lot funnier in SEC Online. He was used in a much more interesting way. Sally apparently waited until now to ask him what he thinks of Nicole. He apparently doesn't think it's weird that's just not organic, and says that he just likes nice people. Well, Sally says that her not being organic takes getting used to for some people. I like his simple wisdom. Meanwhile, we cut to the past, where Sally thinks she doesn't need to take lessons from Rosie anymore because she could just ask Nicole whatever she wants to know. Never mind the fact that it bore Nicole. And it turns out there's an answer to a question that Nicole couldn't help Sally with, because she preferred the idea of putting all the troops on one port to save it, when Sally would rather save everyone because she's more moral. She doesn't seem to realize that you can't save everyone in a war. She realizes that you'll have to be more self-reliant to be a good queen. And Rosie's closed-minded, saying that Nicole couldn't be her royal advisor because she doesn't look like a normal person. As far as I'm concerned, she is alive. I'm sure even sufficiently advanced robots could be capable of reproducing. And then what? At least they hug. And Rosie apologizes for putting her on the spot, so the writer's showing awareness that she's supposed to be a nice person that was unusual for her. Meanwhile, I like that Nicole says that this qualifies as frustrating. Something with glowing eyes briefly looks behind her shoulder in cyberspace, just to conveniently not hurt her and go away, to pad out the story. So Nicole has the time to tell Tails to partition the system to limit the virus's movement. Wait, Nicole is like the master of her own domain in cyberspace. Why doesn't she partition the system? I guess the virus was made by Eggman. It better have some origin. Nicole gets complimented. Tails unfortunately doesn't tell us what embarrassing thing happened when he was playing fetch with T-Pup, so why even bring it up? That's like trying to do a joke and then opting out. And Dr. E says that the circumstances with making Nicole were unusual. Then Nicole satisfyingly says that he doesn't have to talk about her as if she's not here. He asks her if she remembers when she was first activated. Well, to be fair, that's a long time ago, and most people wouldn't remember everything. If she's like a person, she would have forgotten some memories to make room for new ones. She says that she remembers everything, but can't view those events as she sees things now. So, she doesn't have a mind's eye? That's actually a real condition that people can have. So it doesn't have to be because she's an AI. So I guess it's not completely unrealistic, if even organics can have that problem. I don't see why she'd have this condition, unless she was based on someone who did. We cut to the past, and we see him being told by the computer Nicole that she has no set name, and he whines about it. If he was able to make Nicole, he wouldn't have this problem at this point. He asks Nicole if there was any catalyst or event that changed her outlook, and is told no. Her having friends? Why does she not realize that? Didn't she realize that in the reboot? I guess she means no specific point. She should say it occurred gradually. She says that many of her memories have only made her regret how limited she used to be. Well, babies grow up, so it might make sense that she started out as more limited, and machine learning algorithms that don't suck made her become better and smarter, like people become smarter. Then we see Sally in the past saying that she has to be brave for her suffering friends because a princess, being famous, has to keep everyone else inspired, so she can't be seen as weak. Then she cries and says she misses her father so much, and she thanks Nicole for being there, despite saying that Nicole can't really care. And instead of being offended, Nicole just stayed silent, I guess from wanting to be polite and not being sure what to say. Still, you'd think she would say that she does care, even if she doesn't. And the scene was kind of pointless. We already knew she missed her father. Then we see Sally at the Lake of Rings, and it's charming to see Big say that Froggy would have loved this place. And she says he could bring him here someday. Not that we'll ever get to see it. Well, that would be boring and pointless. He says Froggy gets jealous when left behind on trips. So this is taking an idea from his fan comic 3B, that he knows what Froggy's saying. I guess through telepathy. Why can't I read anyone else's mind? Maybe because he never tried. He never had to. I guess that's the case with Cream, too. Sally says that the Nice Nick is unresponsive and is stupid enough to say Big is allowed to drive on the way back because she's distracted. Well, distracted, I guess that makes sense, since she wouldn't put much thought into it. She says there's an energy spike. I like that Big fished up the next red ring. It actually looks like a red ring this time. Sally says it was perfect timing, fortunately lampshading this so that it feels more realistic. And predictably, she's interrupted in the next panel. The Badnik tries to attack her, but of course, since she took longer than one panel to defeat it, Big attacked it instead. It does make more sense that the bigger character would be more successful in a fight than her. I don't understand why the Badnik reactivated. I guess because of Phage, who wants to spite her because of Eggman? I only know Phage's name because the title cover of the previous issue spoiled it for me. Sally wonders if someone is trying to get the red rings too, and says that there's still an energy reading, and asks if it's the lake itself. Oh, that's weird. There weren't any bad consequences from Big driving. At least that subverts my expectation, instead of having a predictable joke at his expense. Tails was completely useless, apparently. Though it's realistic that he yawned and was told to get to sleep. Fleetway Tails is more respectable because he had tons of solo adventures where he got to put the villains in jail. He did over 100 things that were useful. Sally wants to check on the Sky Patrol by calling Rotor, and it's really confusing that we only hear one side of the story. At least that speaks of the pacing, but the fact that she's being shown recapping the whole story arc to Rotor has already destroyed the pacing anyways. We didn't need to see this. And while I guess I appreciate that Rotor said that hacking isn't like it is in the movies, it'd be far more interesting if we got to see what he meant by that. Like, what hacking is really like. Then Sally sees a shadow in between some stone walls when lighting doesn't work that way. Is it a ghost? And she's sternly told off for snooping around. Okay, so the story didn't suck. This issue was by Ian Flynn, and even halfway through the story, I wasn't that mad at it. Though in retrospect, it was mostly just a waste of time where nothing got accomplished. So it was more of a boring, alright and forgettable story. Not exactly a memorable one where exciting and important things happen. Big gets a Lake of Rings red ring from his fishing rod. And nobody else accomplished anything. The end. Well, at least Big had a lot of charming dialogue. That alone made it worth it. But still, Big's accomplishment was one panel.